Hi, folks. I'm Overdrive Senior Editor Todd Dills and wanted to welcome you to our discussion today, dealing with after-treatment demons. This panel and Q&A will revolve around diesel emission systems and maintenance, both when it comes to the preventive variety and the assistance that any driver can give to shop personnel in efforts to diagnose problems for effective, complete repairs after the dashboard lights up. We've got two diesel pros on with us today, both with a wide breadth of experience that spans the evolution from purely mechanical engines through electronic controls and now increasingly complicated emissions controls. Sorry about that, guys. Forgot to turn my camera on. Anyways, I was getting you those emissions controls. They are the two pros we have. First up, a man many of you are probably plenty well familiar with as a past contributor to Overdrive, and whose voice you've heard more recently on radio. He got a program every Tuesday from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. That's Pennsylvania-based Pittsburgh Power founder, Bruce Mallinson. Bruce, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Todd.
I wonder if you could give us a little bit of your background, Bruce. I know a lot of folks are familiar with Pittsburgh Power, but if they're not, when did it start? What's the focus of the business? And where are you today?
Well, my background started in 1965 when I was 16 years old and discovered the internal combustion engine. I gave up baseball, the saxophone, and golf clubs. And I became fascinated with cars, and then it went on to racing, and I ended up in road racing, a 66 Corvette. That led me into the diesel engine business. I was in traffic and transportation. I joined the trucking industry in 1969. 1977 is whenever I took over a small fuel injection shop for a Chuck Passmore that wanted to move to Tampa, Florida. And then I brought race car technology into diesel engines, and we're always looking to improve. Even to this day, 44 years later, we are improving. So we have 3 dynos now, 5 electrical engineers, 7 mechanics. I'd like to have 10 mechanics. That's a hard thing to find, but our goal is to make the owner operator happy with his truck. When he said, "I love my truck now," then we know we're successful.
Yeah, great. Also live with us, though from Central Daylight Time, Pontiac, Illinois, is Gray's Garage owner, Jeff Gray. Jeff's business is an international service-only dealer, I think, right, Jeff?
That's correct.
And, otherwise, they do work on all manner of engine and truck makes with some limitations. Jeff, big thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, give us a little background there, too, on the shop. And I think your dad opened it up in the 60s. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. He started the business in 63, shortly after he got out of the Air Force. And long story short, when I graduated from high school in 78, I actually had started there a few years before that, but finished school, and I've been there ever since. I started off, I swept floors, and just kind of worked my way up, and eventually it started to get to the point where it looked as though I would possibly be able to buy the business from my dad, and so I took a lot more interest in what I was doing, and then I just kind of started doing everything to where it made a difference to me how quick I could get something done, but more importantly, getting it done right the first time.
Right.
And then, back in the 80s, early 90s, you didn't use a computer. Everything was done, test light, multimeter. But then as everything changed, you had to start using like a ProLink or some sort of communication, and then on into computers. And I didn't want anything to do with it at first, but that's all I do anymore. I mean, it's just one of those things that you have to evolve. And, if you don't have the proper software to work on things, you do what I call it, and that's caveman. And you better have background on how the stuff is supposed to work, but you still can't do a very good job if you don't have a schematic and know exactly how it's supposed to be wired and work. So, right. I don't like that. So we have invested a lot of money in the past 8 years or so, getting all of the latest software for every make and model of heavy duty truck and transmission. and software so that you can talk to it. You can bring up schematics when you have a problem.
Right.
And you have to understand how they actually work. And when one thing malfunctions, it can affect something else. So just because you have a code for an oxygen sensor doesn't mean that the oxygen sensor is bad. You have to check the circuit out, and there's more to it than that even. So, like I said, I own the business now, and I've been there since full-time since 1978. Physically started there in 76, and I love it. My wife actually retires in about 6 weeks. I really don't have any desire to retire. I like what I do.
So you're gonna stay. You're gonna stay in it a little longer. It sounds like,
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to know before we get too far into, for everyone watching, if you've got questions for either of these two gentlemen or the one I'm about to hand things off to get us really going, just go ahead and drop a comment under the YouTube stream or on the page at overdriveonline.com, where we're streaming this as well. Our social media coordinator, Holly Young, is monitoring both those pages, and we'll send those questions my way. If it's a question about your truck too, of course, and you're looking for some hints at a diagnosis, perhaps tell us as much about it as you can to help offer guidance and thoughts on a diagnosis on any specific issues. Speaking of which, wanted to hand it off to the man most recent Overdrive readers will know best among these three, though. His name is Gary Bucks. Retired from the road in late 2019 and has since then increasingly served as a kind of consultant or mentor to a growing number of owner-operators. And Gary, since it's your story that largely brought us back to the subject of emission systems maintenance for this panel, I wondered if you could kind of set us up on some of the issues that owner-operators you work with have been seeing with their equipment and the questions that it brings up for you. I know there's a lot in there, not only about maintaining the emissions equipment and related electrical systems and all that entails, but also, just basically budgeting for it, considering that total life cycle cost of a part of the modern diesel that it feels like many just don't account for the same way they would wear items like tires and brakes or fuel costs even.
Well, thank you, Todd, Bruce, and Jeff for being a part of this story. It really began, I want to say it began with my friend John Osinga in Virginia, which I wrote the blog about, where he had just 6 months or more of misdiagnosis, replacing of sensors and so on. When the short story is there was a broken part inside of the after treatment system, a physical deflector plate for the doser valve that it was supposed to spray against. And it took them months to finally figure out. So they were just putting Band-Aids on with new sensors and what the computer was telling, but the computer couldn't tell them that it had a broken part inside. So it really got me thinking about how many times we get ill-diagnosed or misdiagnosed and how much money that's costing people. Let me even back this story up just a hair more. I've done a few surveys in a small group I have and with others about what the cost they spend on after treatment repair and maintenance. And it'll be a few that'll be $0 to $5,000 a year. There's a 50% or more are spending greater than $15,000 often in that small discussion. It'll probably average often in a year somewhere about $10,000 to $14,000 a year after the truck reaches a certain miles. And it's like 500,000 miles seems to be the break point for a lot of these people. So where I'd like to start off with Jeff and Bruce is kind of to think about this as a flow when we come into the shop. Number one, how do we even diagnose these systems? Where do we start? Do we need to start with the engine first? Because I had a client who had an injector problem, but they said it was the after treatment. You start, so how do we know we're getting what we need when we go to a shop? Jeff, think about this question I asked you years ago. I said, what's the biggest maintenance mistake people make? I don't know if you remember what you told me.
Well, I would say most likely what I was telling you was this is when emissions first came out and there were so many trucks that were programmed with a 5-minute idle shutdown on them. That first off, the dealers were not telling the drivers that you need to turn the key on and wait. You should wait close to 10 seconds before you go to start it, because if you have a intake throttle valve, EGR valve, variable geometry turbo, all of those things calibrate themselves when you turn the key on. If you do what I call a quick start and you just turn the key on and start it like you're starting your car, you're going to get all kinds of phantom codes, because those components, if they only went 25% of the way, they think that's 100%. And until that key is cycled off, it is going to continue to read wrong. There again, if you have an idle shutdown on it and you've exceeded the 5-minute or 10-minute shutdown, some of the older ones were able to be started right back up again. They lose that calibration when the idle shutdown occurs. So you have to, if you have one of those, make sure you turn the key off, wait 10 seconds, turn the key back on, wait 10 seconds, and then start it. So those were some of the biggest ones. But even more than that, good owner operators need to know their vehicle. They need to know every sound that truck makes. They need to know what it feels like. They need to watch their gauges. They need to know, their boost. Where does it normally run when they're running down the road under a load? What kind of temperature does it run? And any other gauges that you have, know the sounds. That way, when something does start to happen, what sounds different or what feels different? And then don't be afraid to tell whoever is going to work on it. Don't be afraid to give them all the information that it's about it. When I would much rather have the driver that was operating the vehicle come in so I can talk to them myself, rather than have their boss call and say, well, he's got a vibration or it's low on power. There's a lot of different things that can cause that. And if you talk to the operator, you can get a whole lot more information than just, it's short on power. So those are the things I would start with.
When someone comes into the shop, how do you make sure you get the right information from them? Do you have a kind of a questionnaire, a sign-in process, an interview kind of tell me, make sure that you're getting, what they've done to the truck previously, for example?
That is all things that I would absolutely go into. For example, yesterday we had a truck that was in that had his truck worked on just 2 days prior, and he came into our shop, had the exact same codes that he had those 2 days before, and 3 weeks before that he had the exact same codes. Long story short, what was wrong is when the dealers were working on it, they weren't using the right size test probes for checking the terminal fit, and they expanded them. They were not getting good connection. That was all that's wrong. But he had the sending units replaced twice on both of them, and it was just because they didn't use the correct size test leads when they were working on it.
Bruce, what do you want to say about that question? What is your shop and your process?
Well, when they call to make the appointment, we talk to them about their truck, and I'm a big fan of turbo boost and exhaust gas temperature. I will ask, what is your boost on the level? What is your boost at wide open throttle at high RPM? And what's the exhaust gas temperature? The majority of trucks, especially ex-fleet trucks, do not have the gauges. So now we start from the beginning, and they tell us over the telephone what their problem is, and then we do a write-up. And then we tell them, please have a pencil and a piece of paper and jot down everything that you think is wrong with your truck. And then when you show up for the appointment, we interview them again and we do the write-up. And a lot of times, Brian, our shop foreman, will meet with them and talk to them. And then sometimes if we think it's electrical, we'll take them into our electrical engineering department, and they'll meet with one of our 5 electrical engineers, and we'll discuss it. They'll bring the laptop out, they'll download it. And if we think there's a question, we'll put it on the dyno and run it. And then it comes back into the shop.
I'd like to say to the owners, the drivers that are tuning in to watch this, I think one of the problems they have is they don't often have a lot of confidence about what they're going to tell someone at the shop. like yourself or your service manager, the people at the desk, they're a little embarrassed maybe that they don't know as much as they probably should. They're shy. They're not really often good at communication. And so I want to encourage the owners that need to keep notes in their notebook, for example, and not be afraid to share. Hey, a week ago, something didn't, like Jeff said, it didn't feel right, it didn't start right. I tried to start it, then didn't sound right. I had to shut it off and restart it, and then it seemed to be right, or different things. Or maybe I got a bad tank of fuel, and I finally got through that last month, but did it cause problems? So I think people, like I say, I think they're embarrassed about maybe sharing because they feel like they'll be judged. Do you find that to be a problem?
We find that sometimes people will come in and they're talking to you at the parts counter, and they'll have a whole list of things in their head, and now they get the mental block. That's why we ask people to write it down.
Yeah.
And a lot of times whenever you're working on the truck, they'll come out of the driver's lounge and they'll say, oh, by the way, my truck was doing this, or could you check this? Oh, could you put this gauge on, or do this, or put a new torsional damper and balancer on? So it's nice when they have a note and have it written down. Very few do.
Now, Jeff, you get a lot of repeat business, I believe, based on the history I've had with you. So that really helps you in your shop. You do get people that come in off the road, tow in or whatever. So how do you deal with getting the proper information?
I personally talk to them. If I am not available, my right-hand man, Jay, will get in there. He knows exactly what I would want to know. And if I am not able to talk to him, we make sure we get all the contact information so that I can call them the first available time that I can talk to them about it, because I will make sure that I road test everything before we work on it. Because there are so many times, for example, guys says he's got a clutch that's going out, and if you don't take it out for a test drive and then you go and you put a clutch in it, you take it out for a road test and you find out that synchronizers are out in the back section, you could have fixed that while it was out. So a lot of times they'll think that there's something else going on. For example, today, the guy said he had a shake in his front end. It wasn't the shake in the front end. It was his air ride was too low and it was shaking in the back end, but he could feel it coming through the floor and the steering wheel. So, you have to talk to them, and I always want to talk to them before I drive it, so I don't have to waste my time driving it once and say, okay, now what am I looking for? You need to find out everything you can. Just as Bruce said, you need to get as much information as possible, and good information. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as, does it only act up when it's raining out? Or, or when you hit a bump, that kind of stuff.
Jeff, speaking of getting back to the kind of the emissions system, I believe you said that about 20% of the work in your shop is related to after treatment. I was wondering if that's when we were talking before all of this, but I was wondering if you might characterize for us a little bit the kinds of problems that you see there. Is it all related to the DPF, or is it the kind of things that I hear more about, which are, sensors going faulty, electrical problems within the system,
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything, but the bulk of the stuff that we work on, we are a Navistar service dealer, but we really don't get, that's a small portion of what we do. Most of what we do is local customers. And we are getting more and more work. We're getting customers from the Chicagoland area, which, they're 100 miles away. We're getting them from as far as St. Louis. I would like to say that we've got a pretty good reputation for the kind of work that we do, the personal attention that we give to the customer. But to go back to most of the stuff is old enough that it's not under warranty anymore.
Right.
A lot of them have been misused or driven hard and put away wet. But they haven't been maintained properly. And a good portion of it is electrical. You know, that if they've been using it in construction and you get mud and everything up in there where the harnesses are, and you're off road and everything's twisting around, that stuff works in and gets into not just connections, but in between where the harnesses, the sheathing and mounting brackets, and it'll wear right through. And at first, you know, like I was saying, as far as the problems will start when it's wet out, but eventually get to where they're there all the time. You know, most of the time, if it's only when it's raining out or something like that, you've got an electrical fault somewhere that is rubbed through, but not enough that it's shorting it out permanent. But when you get the salt water and stuff like that, it actually will cause it to short across to something else and change the readings. And, you know, most of the time you can repair the harness. There are some times where I had one a couple weeks ago that it was not repairable. So, you know, those, fortunately, most of the OEM harnesses are replaceable. And at this point, they're still readily available.
Right. Everything of the vintage of truck that we're talking about is definitely still available, right, from 2000.
Yeah, and then we do have a lot of knock sensors that go bad on a lot of them, because we have contracts with school systems. We've had a lot of the DEF coolant control valves go bad. When they go bad, it causes the DEF to get so hot that it actually ruins the optic eye in the DEF tank, and also ruins the DEF tank level sensor all at the same time. Right. We've had a lot of those. Probably more. That's probably the biggest things that we have had in the last year, because we do so many buses.
Okay. And is that a problem more in you know, kind of more vocational applications than over the road?
Well, that is just strictly on you know, very little of the where they really had the real problems in the vocational was 07 and early 2010 emissions.
Okay.
You know, there was a lot of changes in trying to make the fuel mapping work right, because everything is completely different in stationary application, because it's considered PTO mode, and they're very strict. For lack of a better term, each RPM and engine load has basically a piece of pie, and you cannot cross over on more fuel or more boost until you get past that little piece of pie to the next one. And so you get right there in the middle, and then the EGR valves and variable geometry turbo start working back and forth to try to get it over that. So they really struggled with that in the 2010 emissions. 07 emissions, you know, there was, you know, Navistar really tried to keep so that they did not have DEF like, you know, others did. You know, fortunately, they have got all that stuff resolved. But Navistar did get a really, you know, they lost a lot of customers because of that. But they are coming back.
Right. Bruce, Gary has talked a good bit about the kind of psychology of dealing with emissions problems and kind of or approaching them in a preventative fashion, just simply due to the cost involved. I was wondering if you run into that with Pittsburgh Power, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about you know, the kind of diesel force cleaning that you can do at the shop there that costs quite a lot, but has a significant preventative, I think, effect on emissions if paired with your max mileage catalyst, which is a fuel treatment. Do you run into fear of cost in that kind of folks?
No, not really. Yes,
No?
it is expensive. The chemicals for the diesel force cleaner are really expensive, but when you look inside the head, such as on an ISX or an X15 Cummins, if you look before and after you do the diesel force, it will be bare cast iron. You'll think that it's a brand new head. It cleans that well. Now, keep in mind that if you wait till 500,000 miles, you have a lot of soot and carbon built up in that engine. in the combustion chamber, the exhaust valves, EGR cooler, and then down through the DPF. Now, when you're flushing all that, it's going down and it's going to face plug the DPF. So after we do the diesel force cleaning, and then we do a forced regen, if we think the DPF needs clean, then we'll remove it and clean it. And then we follow it up with a diet on the catalyst and the problems go away. We have ultrasonic cleaners here. We take the sensors that are in the exhaust system. We take the sensors out. We take them apart, put them in the ultrasonic cleaner for about 20 minutes. They look brand new. You put them back in, and 99% of the time they'll work perfectly. So we don't have to replace a lot of sensors.
Okay.
And if you stay on the max mileage, it's 1 ounce to 25 gallons. It costs you 1 penny per mile to run the catalyst, but the savings is 6 cents per mile. They're saying that it's 17 cents per mile maintenance to run a newer truck with emissions, 2012 and up. The older trucks, the 2002 and older, were 10 cents a mile. Years ago, back in the mid 80s, it was 5 cents a mile. So whenever you run the max mileage fuel-borne catalyst, it'll take you from 17 cents a mile down to under 10 cents a mile maintenance cost on that truck.
Do you guys have a good bit of long-term customers that have been running this for a long time and kind of proven that out?
Yes, Jane Gates, it's actually Dr. Jane
Okay.
Gates. She's been in the chemical business. It's 38 years now. She had worked on this formula for 12 years and then when I met her in 2017 at the Louisville Truck Show, they came to our shop the following week, her and her partner, Britt, and we did some testing and we found out that it burned 70% more of the soot and carbon in the combustion chamber. It lowered the NOx, I think it was by 30%. And we did see a slight gain in fuel mileage, but the catalyst is not made for fuel mileage. It's made to keep the engine clean. And anybody that has suffered from carbon packing on the rings, and if you've ever seen a piston that's had carbon packing, the piston ring is actually locked into the ring gland, and now it's no longer in contact with the cylinder walls. And now you have a tremendous amount of blow-by and oil consumption. The catalyst actually helps to eliminate, it eliminates that. But if you have an engine that's starting to use oil because of carbon packing, it will take and clean that piston and eliminate the oil consumption and decrease the blow-by. Now, if you wait too long, then you're going to have to rebuild it. So we have had clients on for 3 years now on the max mileage catalyst, and they are running trouble-free. And if you go onto our website, pittsburghpower.com, and you go into the max mileage catalyst section, you can read a lot of the testimonials. And I give you one that's really interesting. This is a tour boat. It runs up the Columbia River. It hauls 96 passengers. It runs 3512 cats. These are big, large V12 Caterpillars. The smokestack came right out through the center of the ship, right out on the upper deck. But they had black soot balls coming out of the stack and could not use that deck for their passengers. And that's where everybody wants to be when they're on a tour boat, is up on the top deck. After running the catalyst for a few trips up the Columbia River, no more soot balls. Now they use the top deck. And the stories just go on and on. And if you have a Harley Davidson and you don't like the way it runs or sounds, put 1 cc per gallon and you'll be surprised after 10 miles of how quiet that engine will be. You can lug it down to 1,000 RPM. We don't recommend that, but you can. Last night I was on the Harley and I came out of a 90-degree turn and I looked and I was at 1,000 RPM and the bike just picked up and went. Mid-60s muscle cars, they do not like today's gasoline. They love the fuel-borne catalyst. So it has, I mean, people were using it in log splitters, everything. And it was designed for diesel.
Right.
But Dwayne Erkey, who was an ex-dairy farmer in Wisconsin, he was the first person to put it in gasoline. He tried it on a Harley and a Model A and a Model T Ford. He called me and said, "Bruce, you have to try this."
So Jeff, how do you don't have a cleaning system in your shop for filters. So So some of the typical situations where you determine that the filter has to be cleaned and for the customer, go through a couple of the scenarios of the decisions that have been made and why and how you deal with that and helping them make the best long-term decision.
Well, what would have led you to that point is you're most likely getting codes for the DPF efficiency. The exhaust back pressure is going to be way too high. The DPF differential pressure is going to be too high. The SCR efficiency is going to be bad. But yet your sensors are all appear to be working correctly. So then you would, one of the first things, if somebody's run it way too long, or if there's any damage to the outside of the DPF, so if you ever have been in an accident and there's a dent in the side of it, it's damaged and it's going to be damaged internally too. So, and that's something to keep in mind. If you have a vehicle that's involved in an accident, it's not just exhaust. You know, these are some pretty high dollar parts. And if those things have been jarred very hard, or there's a crease in that thing, it is, I will bet money on it, it's going to be damaged. But, you know, you look back inside of it and you can actually see the catalyst should look like a honeycomb. And if, you know, the inlet side, the outlet side should be clean. It is not going to, should not be black. If it's black, or you see black coming around the outside edges of it, or especially if you have chunks that are coming out of it or cracks in it, it's bad. It's got to be replaced.
The cost of these replacements are deterrent. John Osinga, the original person I talked to, when I mentioned replacing the filter, he says, "Oh my gosh, you know what that thing costs?" That's a real deterrent to maintaining the system for a lot of people. You get pushback from people that say, "Well, is there any way you can just, you know, pressure wash it, or, you know, what else can we do? Do we have another alternative?" What do they say?
If you're asking me that, I don't have an alternative other than having it cleaned and tested or replace it. There's no alternative to fixing it right. And on something like that, if it is failing all of those tests and, you know, it's testing bad, then that's the only route that we will go. You know, and if they want to take it somewhere else, or, you know, have us force it to do a few regens and get it so they can make it on down the road and they can have it repaired somewhere else that they may want to do it, you know, that's up to them. But, you know I get an awful lot of questions about going in and deleting these things. And I tell every single one of them, these engines and trucks are designed to have this on there. All you're doing is asking for trouble going in and deleting that kind of stuff. You know, you don't know what kind of calibrations they're putting in. You know, you may be able to make it so it performs good and gets good fuel mileage, but it's not going to last very long, most likely, because they're designed to work the most efficient right when they come out the door from the factory. Anytime you modify something like that, you're opening the door to other problems.
That is something I hear a lot of, and I have to agree that we have to be careful trying to, I guess, J-tree engineer these systems. It's not like the old trucks used to be. And when I had a question, like with your catalyst, with fuel treatment like that, can we over treat that fuel? What happens if we get too much of this in the fuel for too long? Can it create issues in an engine?
Yeah, we tell people it is 1 ounce to 25 gallons. Sometimes people have done 2 ounces of 25 gallon, and we say, drive 100 miles or 200 miles down the road and top off your tank, and continue to do that until we get it down to where we think it's 1 ounce to 25. But it has not, we have not had any ill effects because of that, but we tell people not to do it.
Yeah, because we know that people are, they're human, and if 1 ounce is good, 2 or 3 might be better off than they think. But maybe the cost of that product helps them maintain that 1 ounce. So that would be
Sure.
a benefit of that. So, yeah. And so
Wha- How do you get, Bruce, you mentioned some DPF cleaning methods that it sounded like you were talking about something that's somewhat fairly new and maybe a little bit outside of the box when we were talking earlier. How does Pittsburgh Power handle DPF cleaning at this point?
Well, right now, we're doing a pressure washing, and
Okay.
in the next few months, we'll become a franchisee of DPF Alternatives. And they do the ultrasonic cleaning.
Gotcha.
It's a very elaborate system, very elaborate testing. It's the finest of everything we've done. Yes, it's very expensive. However,
what will that cost for if someone needs a filter cleaned, roughly ballpark? And is there a difference between the truck manufacturer, does a Daimler system cleaner versus a Cummins or Volvo? Is there different costs for different systems?
I can't answer that. I can tell you the average cleaning for the first time is $450.
Okay.
And with DPF Alternatives, if you run the max mileage catalyst and you have them clean your emission systems, they give you a lifetime warranty.
So if you need it cleaned again, they pay for the cleaning?
They will pay for the cleaning.
I see.
You'll have to have receipts to show that you have been buying the catalyst, whether you buy it from them or you buy it from us or the Iowa 80 truck group, where we have about 108 dealers throughout North America. It doesn't matter where you buy it. You just have to have proof that you are using it.
Jeff, you mentioned one time while I was at the shop, for folks that might be tuning in or watching this later, Jeff's shop worked on my truck that I owned for 17 years. And that's why I contacted Jeff about this story, because not only did they do great work, I trusted the truth of the information and so on. But when we look at these systems, I remember you mentioning that people have to be careful not to void warranties. They may buy an older truck but still have a warranty. They have to be careful they don't do things that void their warranty. For example, you mentioned that you could have an exhaust leak on one of these systems, and if not careful, in timely repairs. Is that an issue sometimes?
I tell you,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
One
Bruce.
of the advantages of doing the diesel force cleaning, that foam will find every exhaust leak in that system, and then we do repair them all. But we always look for exhaust leaks.
Yeah.
And then the number one rule on a turbocharged engine is 0 exhaust leaks, especially prior to the turbo.
Okay. Jeff, what about the exhaust leaks? What do you have to say about that and warranties, and what do you find?
Well, as Bruce is saying, you can't have an exhaust leak. So the way he's talking about, they would be able to find those very well. But you also have to have boost leaks also. So both of those have a lot to do with the air management of the system. So if you're over fueling because of lack of boost or lower exhaust back pressure, you're going to create more soot. And there are, let's say, for example, I think one of the things we had talked about was where you could have warranty issues. If you've been driving the truck for any amount of time with the engine warning light on, if you've got an after treatment system, the DPF is disabled. If your engine warning light's on, it is not functioning. And it logs on all newer trucks. It will log how many times it's happened, what the time span is, and when the first time was, when the last time was, and all of that is compiled when, like, for example, we're a Navistar dealer. First thing we do is we hook up and we do what's called a health report. It takes every code from that truck and it is downloaded to Navistar. There's no lying to them. This all pops up to them and they can see everything that has happened. And you were operating the thing with, let's say, for example, low fuel pressure for an extended period of time. And you wound up having a fuel pump went out on it because all these newer ones are running very high fuel pressure. Or on some of the older Huey ones, you run low fuel pressure, it ruins those injectors. Or, it doesn't atomize the fuel well. All of these things go into maintenance items. If just because it was low fuel pressure, it could have been a fuel filter. And so because of not changing the fuel filter, caused the injectors to go bad, and on down the line, the after treatment problems were a result of a lack of maintenance. So those are the kinds of things you really have to stay up on your truck. Make sure that these things, if that warning light's on, you need to get it looked at. It may not be affecting how it's performing right now, but in the long run, it is going to, because that after treatment system is disabled if the engine warning light is on.
When people are driving their truck, even without warning lights, you talked about knowing how the engine and the vibrations, how things sound in that. When you talk about engine performance, like low fuel or things, like I was big on tracking my fuel mileage for maintenance and repairs more than economics. If I saw a change, I wanted to get it in the shop and question, hey, go find what's wrong. There's something has changed, for example. Is that a reasonable thing people, as far as managing their equipment, those kind of things, or what kind of suggestions would you make to them?
I would say have them keep logs and do just like you did, and log your fuel mileage, log how much oil you're going through, and between oil changes. It's just, I don't even know for sure where to go on this. I mean, there are so many things that I could tell people that they really should keep an eye on. How it, like I said before, how it feels, how it performs. Am I able to, with a load, am I able to get up to 55 mile an hour in a half a mile? It still may get proper boost, but still not be able to perform like it did before. Just because boost is there doesn't mean that your performance is, or the exhaust back pressure is high. You may not, your injectors can be out of adjustment, and it's not going to atomize the fuel as well. I'm sure that if Bruce would attest to this. There are a lot of times it's just maintenance things. If it's got 100,000 miles, or especially 150,000 on it since it was overhauled, at some point in there, you really should have had the valve set. Some valves will get tight, some will get loose. It's not going to perform as well. So documenting that kind of stuff is really important.
Okay.
We got a specific question. By the way, if anybody out there watching has a question, drop it in the comments. Holly will get it over to me for sure. But this is one I got from a reader, and it kind of has to do with prevention and kind of service intervals on any parts of the emission system. But particularly this reader was asking about the diesel particulate filter. He had an experience where he had to get a cleaning, or and I think it ended up being just a quick replacement that like you talked about earlier, Jeff. While he was on the road, and he realized like later on when he was at home that he basically paid 4 times the amount that he for that he would have on the road. I mean, if he was at home. How do we make the determination on a good interval for that? I know there are fleets out there that kind of bump the OEM, sort of ballpark schedule. They bump it up and they do it more quickly for their equipment. Is that the prescription for it? Should we go by engine hours rather than mileage, given how much more of an effect that idling has on soot in the DPF?
Okay.
Anybody with thoughts on that?
It all has to do with how the truck is operated. Every driver drives it a little bit different, and if somebody's driving in the mountains, it is going to be pushed a bit harder when you're going up the hill, and not as hard coming down the hill. If you're hauling road building materials, or if you're in working in a city and you're constantly speeding up and slowing down, that's going to increase, the frequency of when you would have to do a regen or how often that it will do it on its own. So every vehicle is different, and a good portion of it is how it's driven. If you're the kind of person that drives like me, I don't put my foot in it very often unless I'm testing for performance on a truck. But when I drive my own stuff, my wife says I drive like an old man. I don't drive stuff hard. But if you have somebody that's younger that, trying to get an extra load in a day, or, they know that their hours are going to run out and they're going to push it harder. And you do that frequently, that every time you push it hard like that, it does create more soot. It should take care of itself, but they can only hold so much.
Right. Bruce, something to add to that?
Yeah. Jeff, the reason you and I drive that way is because, being mechanics, we know how to fix them, but we don't want to have to fix our own. So we know the limits of the mechanical aspect of life, and there's just no reason to do that. And we do find that trucks that are like in the oil patch with a lot of idling, cement mixers, school buses, they do suffer more from the carbon and soot buildup than a guy that's over the road. And a guy that does run through the mountains and does get it hot, we're finding in the summertime we have less problems than in the wintertime with emissions.
Right.
That brings up a good point. We wrote this coming out of, after the first of the year. Are we having more problems during winter with winter fuel blends and things like that versus summer? Can you tell a seasonal difference in these systems and so on?
Yes. Once it started to warm up, people will report back to me that, and especially whenever they're crossing the Rocky Mountains or one of the large mountains out west, that the regenning is less.
Okay. Well, you're Midwest, right by where I live mostly. You have a few, over the road, but a lot of more local. So you may see more of the seasonal differences. Do you find anything there that you want to reflect on?
You're asking me, Gary?
Yeah, as far as how the fuel quality, the systems, how they work seasonally, more problems with, water or other problems in the wintertime and so on. How does that affect us?
Well, obviously we get some pretty severe cold here. Most of the time it's not for more than just a few weeks. You absolutely, around here, you have to use fuel additive when it gets that cold. Fuel will just wax up. So there again, if it waxes up, your filter gets plugged up, you have low fuel pressure, or it may not even start. As far as the after treatment portion of it, we really don't notice any more after treatment issues in the winter rather than summer. But a good portion of our work that we do is construction. And obviously in wintertime, they're not doing a whole lot.
Real quick, Jeff, there's something you mentioned to me when I was interviewing you for the article about condensation building up in the after treatment systems, and how it may be beneficial to start the truck, get it good and warm, turn it back off to reset, so that because of the condensation that may have frozen over in the system. Any thoughts on that you share?
For us, because we do get a lot of temperature change, warm and cold, and especially if a truck has sat for an extended period of time, you do get condensation that gets in there. And depending on how the exhaust is designed, there are a lot of trucks that the stack aims straight up in the air. And when it rains hard, that water gets down in there. It should drain out in the bottom, but sometimes those get plugged up. So the water can get backwards through the DPF. And then when you start it up, it could be they operated fine when it got parked, but then you had all the rain or the condensation got in there. If you start it up and start speeding the engine up, you could be going from it saying that the after treatment system is good the last time it was driven, right straight to a stage 3 regen, just because of the water having to be forced out And we've had a lot of them that we physically took the pipes off and drained the water from them. But obviously drivers aren't going to want to have to do that.
Yeah.
But if you were to start it up and just mildly take it up, to maybe 900 RPM or so, and just let it sit there and warm up. If you've got that condensation in there, you're going to start seeing white smoke, which is just steam that's coming out as it warms up. And then once you let it run that way for a while and you stop seeing that, once you get out and hit the road, you'll see a lot more white steam come out. That's just condensation, water, rain, whatever that has got in there. But typically that doesn't happen just overnight unless you have had a deluge of rain and your truck was facing the right direction that the wind blew the rain down the stack. But I've even had them where they had a rain cap on and it did it. And it's because the wind was blowing so strong that it made the rain cap stand up and it captured even more rain.
You mentioned also, real quick, if trucks have been sitting, voltage can be low. Sometimes it's helpful to let them run a little while, get the batteries up to charge and more full, so you then turn it off, and again let those settings reset with a higher voltage. Any thoughts on that you'd like to share, either of you?
I would, yeah, definitely. If you notice when you go to start it, there again, it's going back to know your truck. What does it sound like when you go to start it? If you notice one day that it just seemed like it cranked harder and maybe or longer, but it went ahead and started anyway, or it wouldn't start and you had to jump start it. I personally would want to take and run it just long enough to get it so that the batteries are charged up, and then I would cycle the key off and then restart it, because low voltage to all of those components I was talking about before, the EGR valve, the variable geometry turbo, they're expecting a certain amount of voltage going to them and returning from them. If you're starting off with low voltage, the return voltage is going to be wrong. They very well could be calibrated wrong at that point, even though they did go the full stroke. So low voltage causes all kinds of problems. So if I had started a truck and was very confident that the voltage wound up going too low when I started because it went and then took off, absolutely warm the engine up a little bit, restart it, shut it down, restart it, and you very likely will keep from having other issues as a result of that. And all at once you got an engine warning light on and you don't know why. And you can take it into the shop, they hook it up, everything tests fine. So now you're spending money to have somebody look at it, and it really didn't need to be done.
All right. Okay, final question, guys. This one came in from one of our viewers here, and it has to do with when you get a DPF cleaning, whether it's whatever method is done. Are there? The reader is asking. Do soot levels need to be reset? I think he's probably referring to something in the computer that needs to be adjusted once you put it back in, I guess. Does that make any sense to you guys?
If you're asking me,
yes.
Depending on the manufacturer, there are some that there will be. On the earlier ones, you actually had to put in a part number or a serial number of it on.
Okay.
On others, you just have to go in and just click on a reset for it, and it will log what the miles and hours are. So it all depends on the manufacturer. You go on a PACCAR, you're going to probably have to go in and disable an EGR delete that would have happened depending on what the code is. Almost anytime you get those kind of codes, it is going to disable the EGR valve. If you don't go in and do that, the EGR valve is not going to function until that is done. So it is possible that those kinds of things would have to be done if you wound up going to the level where it was actually trying to shut down or go to a full D rate to 5 miles per hour.
Gotcha. Yeah, and then that makes sense. Bruce, any final thoughts before we get ready to wrap it up here? Because we're getting pretty close to the top of the hour.
Every truck that comes into our shop, we pressure test the entire intake system. we find that about 80% do have a turbo boost leak. And I'm not
Okay.
saying that it has a bad charge air cooler. It can be a hose, it can be a gasket. We pressurize the turbo, the piping going to the charge air cooler, from the charge air cooler to the intake, and the tube going down to the air compressor. So, and we fix all those. And a lot of power complaints come in that people want to put on a dyno. We put it on a dyno. We verify, yes, it's low power. The very next thing we do is spin a new fuel filter on. The power's back up.
Yep.
That guy just spent $275 for a dyno test for the sake of a fuel filter.
Oh, no.
Years ago, 40 years ago, we used to change. It was routine. Owner operators would change their fuel filters every Saturday, once a week. Now with 50,000 mile drain intervals doesn't mean your fuel filter should go 50,000 miles.
Right.
No.
So pay more
Jeff,
attention to the fuel filter and know whenever you change it. Always carry a couple spares. And if it's been on there for a couple months, you should change it.
Well, I'll go one further than that, you know, and you just happen to mention like a 50,000 mile service interval. To me, oil's cheap. I can't understand somebody even going 30,000 miles on an oil change. To me, the amount of damage that is done, and I know they've come a long way with different oils and filters, but if you're going to go ahead and go the 30,000 miles in the middle, change the oil filter. You know, that filter still gets just as dirty, you know, and it only filters so much, and then it bypasses after you get to that point. You know, I realize you're saving money by not changing the oil as often, but at least change the filter.
Gary,
And-
final thoughts from you, sir.
Yes, and I'd add in there, I asked a well-known tech, Homer Hogg with PA Petro Services, that same maintenance mistake. He quickly said, people don't grease their trucks. And that's the other thing with these long intervals. People are not, they don't know how to grease their own truck. They need to learn that if they're not going to go into a shop and have it done. They need to learn, they need to know the very basics. Our history is our base, and everyone's history is different. And in this business, it's like Groundhog Day. Todd and I talk about how things cycle back. And both Bruce and Jeff being in this business as many years as you have, longer than either of us, I'm sure that you see these problems, you think, well, this is the same thing we've been talking about, 20 years ago. So, but I can't thank you guys enough, Bruce and Jeff, for the knowledge you brought to the readers and listeners here at Overdrive. And this has exceeded my expectations personally. So,
Yes, same
Thank
here,
you.
guys. Definitely. And we'll get ready to wrap it up here. Thanks to everybody who sat along with us as we were going along here. And if I can figure out how to get back to there we go. I appreciate all you joining us. Again, my name's Todd Dills. You can find me over at overdriveonline.com. And on the Overdrive YouTube page, where you can catch a replay of this if you're just coming in at the end. You can catch that over at overdriveonline.com as well. Sign up for our newsletter there. Check out their Overdrive Radio podcast. You can find that here on YouTube as well. But that's it for now. And thanks to Gary, thanks to Bruce, and thanks to Jeff. And we will see you guys next time we do this.